I'm Julie Meyer, and I'm here at the FTE Winter 2024 with Mr. Fernando Murias of Digital Global Systems. Fernando, it's been great to have you with us here at the FTE Winter. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. It's been great to be here.
Listen, you've done so many transactions and taken so many companies to scale. What did you notice about the FTE Winter in terms of what you thought it would be and the people that you met and so forth? What were your observations?
Just a great group of entrepreneurs from a variety of different sectors, which I found very interesting. And just the quality of the people was very high, which was great.
Thank you. Well, thank you. I'm really pleased to hear that. And so you added to that tremendously.
Thank you.
I mean, Digital Global Systems is quite an interesting, I understand why you decided to do this. It's unbelievably strategic for the industry. Do you ever just kind of, how do you manage the impatience of it and you've been building for so long, but the opportunity is literally stratospheric. How do you manage building a business like this over a 10-year period?
We had very good people who had insight into some market trends that were coming, which enabled us to really prepare and do some strategic patent and development and filings that positioned our firm in different parts of the sectors very aggressively. But it has been a little nerve-wracking waiting for the formal announcements from the government and for the market to catch up on some of these issues, specifically with respect to dynamic spectrum sharing and some of the issues that follow that, the rollout of 5G, which is slower than most people expected it to be. But we think the impact's going to be tremendous, and so it's been worth the wait.
The impact of 5G, it's interesting that you say that because, being an American in Europe, there's one group of kind of expectations and rollouts in Europe versus America, and I can't honestly say that I know exactly what that feels like being in the States because I'm not, and so forth. But, when we first met, you said that, in the same way that Apple really controls the rollout of what happens on the App Store, that the owners of Digital Global Systems will really heavily influence the rollout of 5G services. That's a big thing to say, and yet the more I listen to you, the more I really believe that statement. I mean, how can one company really control the rollout of 5G services so strongly? I mean, it's an enormous monopoly position.
Thank you. It's really more a function of the technology that's needed to have services roll out into the market. So. If you focus on the types of services that are coming with both 5G and 6G, they're going to require low latency, high reliability, and in order for a spectral environment to support those services, you have to really understand what's happening in real time with the spectrum. And technology like ours is what enables that knowledge, so that if you're rolling out a particular service in a large geography, you need to know if your service can be supported. And that's what our technology does. And so the owners of Digital Global Systems technology will have the ability strategically to successfully place and roll out services in different geographies because they'll have the knowledge of the spectral environment that can support it.
Now, how much of this is software? How much of it is hardware?
The secret sauce is clearly in the software. Our hardware is COTS components when it's standalone hardware, but more importantly, at scale, we intend to integrate into the existing infrastructure that's in the marketplace. So we will eventually become part of the RAN through an open RAN structure, through accelerated chipsets that will embed itself into the RAN and provide a lot of the functions that are needed for this type of environmental sensing.
Do you have a sense that does it split in terms of regions of the world, leading or lagging, or is it more complex than that?
Well, I think that's a good question with respect to 5G in and of itself. And I think the US is looking to be a leader in the rollout of 5G and 5G standards. And so you'll see, I think, a lot of movement this year. There's an auction in the US this year for 3.1 to 3.45 gigahertz that have been earmarked for 5G services. That particular auction, the government for the first time in 50 years is not vacating that spectrum, but will share that spectrum with the winner of the auction. And therefore it's going to require a shared spectrum solution. We are the only firm that we know of that has a dynamic spectrum sharing solution ready to go.
Yeah.
It took us 8 years and 9 years to develop it, and close to $100 million in investment to develop the underlying tools to support dynamic spectrum sharing, but we have it and we've demonstrated it, and we're looking forward to reaping the benefits of having foreseen this coming for years now.
The average business person watching us will say, okay, spectrum sharing, business models have gone to shared services, network orientation, so I kind of get this, but still, this idea of a finite asset being shared at the level of spectrum is probably the granddaddy of all shared services when you think about it. This is not like sharing cars in a local commune of Switzerland, right? This is massive sovereign level sharing of services. Surely this requires close cooperation with the governments.
Yeah, and I think if you really focus on what a government's responsibility is, it's to balance the requirements that they have for national security.
Yes.
And for commercial economic expansion.
Yep.
And those two things don't always go hand in hand when you're talking about a finite asset like spectrum.
Yep.
So the governments control the spectrum in their respective countries.
Yep.
And balancing between government use and commercial economic deployment is something that's been happening for years. And so having studied it for several years, the US government has decided the most optimal way to achieve the best result with those two goals in mind is to share spectrum rather than vacate existing spectrum that would be very costly to vacate. And so the world, India, China, governments that are all dealing with this issue are looking very closely at how successful the US government is going to be with a shared spectrum approach, which they've announced as part of their national strategy just this last December.
Okay, interesting. Now, in any, we refer to it as shift, not disruption, because so much of the disruption is enablement, right? We talk about the shift, the velocity of the shift, and the financing of the shift. In any shift, there's winners and losers. With your business and what you are impacting in the market, who wins and who loses?
That's a very complex question, but I would say to you that if we stay on the theme that we're talking about with respect to shared spectrum, the carriers lose an element of control with respect to the infrastructure and the services that are going to be provided. So with all the new services and the revenue related to new services that are coming with 5G and 6G, the carriers with a shared spectrum environment will have less control over that marketplace because hyperscalers and others can benefit from that. And so I would say that from that perspective, there's an element of loss from a carrier standpoint, and the hyperscalers and others will benefit from those new services. I think the consumers are winners because you have all of these new services now deployed. The promise of 5G that's been talked about for years, I think is finally coming. And all the new services that come with that, whether it's enhanced logistics, virtual healthcare, virtual training, a truly broadened approach to automated vehicles, all that's going to start to really be seen by the public in the next 2 years.
Now, a couple of years ago, people used terms like over the top. Is that just, nobody says that anymore. Is that it? Is that just history? That's a result of now that the carriers are recognizing they might have a greater share of the revenues in a kind of network-based model. They might lose the control, but they'll be participating in the economics. So people don't have to go over the top. They just need to accept their position in the market. Is that when did we lose saying over the top? I don't know. I remember.
Yeah, I actually haven't heard that in a while. So maybe we are losing that a little bit. But look, I think the carriers are very strategic, as they should be, and I think anyone, including large companies, inherently resist change unless they're forced to change by market conditions. And I think a lot of what you're going to see coming in the next year, 2 years, is a forced economic change on the consumer as well as large businesses because of the demand that's coming for these services. And as some companies enhance their functionality and start to really differentiate their product, whether it's a RAN or some other aspects that provide more functionality to consumers and therefore the demand starts to really pick up, people are going to be forced to compete with that additional functionality, and therefore the change will shift by the market push, which I think is important. And I think you'll also see not just a shift from historically the last several years we've been very focused on volume and capacity. Can you service the demand for new tablets, new devices, new protocols? You're going to see a shift in the market from demanding volume out of the infrastructure to demanding new services, enhanced functionality from the infrastructure. And that's what's going to cause a big shift as well.
Now, Metcalfe's Law is a telecoms term, but it's really relevant across so many areas, but people in other industries don't necessarily think about the power of the network and the growth of communities, and why are some industries experiencing this exponential growth is because it's not linear. It's a network growth model. So people that would be participating in the rollout of 5G, people that might get in touch with you as a result of seeing you in all of the podiums and platforms and so forth, they might say, I need that. I need to be part of this ecosystem that Digital Global Systems is enabling. How would you say to a company that says, I want to participate in that, I'm not growing the way that I should, I know that there's this network growth model that's happening. How do you facilitate companies coming in? You must have an incredible inbound set of business development opportunities that your team is having.
So when you look at the market sectors that we're focused on, because this is, although the consumer is ultimately benefiting from the technology that we provide, we're not a consumer play, right? We're a business-to-business organization that's focused primarily on the RAN infrastructure, enabling the next generation RAN that'll provide the services that I'm talking about. Our focus is on private wireless, where we can enhance how private wireless is allocating spectrum so that it scales more efficiently. We're focused on first responders because in addition to the communications aspects of what we've been talking about with 5G, ensuring that first responders communication networks are up and running when they need to be is a big part of what our technology also facilitates. And then obviously ultimately the carriers and public wireless will be a very big growth area for us. So we are targeting very specific companies that we believe are strategic in those markets. And obviously they can reach us through our website, www.digitalglobalsystems.com, and get in touch with us. But more than likely, we've already been in touch with them. So
you ran a big piece of PwC in the United States, and so you saw some of the best businesses come through. Were you constantly tempted to jump over and to build a business? Were you sometimes tempted? I'm sure everybody's kind of sought you out and they wanted for your deal making expertise and all sorts of things. How was that? How did you feel as an advisor to, and I know that you did a tremendous amount with the venture community. What did it take for you to jump from that perch and that special place in the industry?
Mostly my age. So I wanted to be on the other side of things before I retired. And so I left PwC 10 years ago, almost 11 years now. And I did see a number of companies as I was responsible for high tech for the East Coast. So saw a number of deals, a number of companies. And I was really just personally enamored with the idea of being on the other side of that, for once before I finally retired. And so as I got close enough to that number, I decided to leave and do this. And I saw an opportunity with Digital Global Systems because I had experience with firms like Google and AT&T and others while at PwC to see the trends that were coming and the growth of wireless and the lack of infrastructure supporting that growth, that we could really play a difference with the right company in that space. And when this got put in front of me, I decided it was the right time for me to jump and make that shift. So it was good. Is
platforms and infrastructure mutually exclusive? How do you define those two terms? People build applications on top of platforms. Is infrastructure revenue generating, or is it more an asset from what? I mean, how do those terms
Yeah,
situate
I
in your
mean,
mind?
to me, infrastructure facilitates growth. When you look at the wireless economy, the underlying infrastructure to support additional devices, to support additional protocols, it needs to be in place for the network to grow. And you can optimize a network, but for it to really grow, you need infrastructure.
Yep.
And what we saw was that there was a tremendous lack of infrastructure to support the growth that we saw coming in wireless. And that's proven to be very true. And it was very highlighted very much in places like South America, where they were growing exponentially without the infrastructure, and therefore the quality of service was very poor. And when you see things like that, it's easy to look at the trends and then take it globally and see where can you start to fill some of those gaps strategically with technology.
To what extent are you also trying to enable the ecosystem with your economic model? And is that part of the embedded play, is to say, and we think the economics should be shared this way? Or do you step back from that, or do you try to impose that?
So that's a great question. I think historically, when you look at how people have tried to improve the infrastructure, minimize interference, etc., it's been a very hardware-centric model. We're really proposing a much different model, which is a software-led license structure to enhance the network and optimize the network.
Yes.
So moving away from a clunky hardware infrastructure that needs to be maintained, that is tough to deploy and scale. Because in order to scale what we're talking about, it has to move very quickly. And so a software model that can be embedded into existing infrastructure is going to scale much more quickly. So you're selling licenses, you're selling data as opposed to selling hardware. And I think that model is really what's needed for the next generation digital economy that's coming. So it can scale quickly and really get embedded globally, not just in the US.
As we know, in Europe, we have a different model, GDPR, which, I think my issue with it is more of a stick than a carrot. I think the enablement of people's personal economies with data is where this is all going to go. As an American, I don't think that the Silicon Valley digital native platforms, which are worth nearly $1 trillion, are going to ever allow the property rights for data to shift to the individual. How do you see that ownership of data, which could be the biggest leveling effect and uplifting effect for personal economies? The American model is not really enabling the individual. The European model is, I think, not really, but they're making an attempt. Does this come out of Africa, Latin America, and places that are not perceived as the leading innovator quadrants? How do you see that?
That's an interesting question. I would say to you that I think the value of data is just now getting understood from an economic perspective. When you look at deals in the last 2 years, very few, and only now, are companies really valuing data from an enterprise perspective when they look at M&A transactions. So understanding the value of data, which in some cases can be more valuable than the company's intellectual property and patents, is that education will start to bring potential model shifts away from the enterprise more to the individual. I haven't seen that happen in the US. But it's something that's clearly possible. But I think people are just now, even consumers, starting to understand the value of data. And so we'll see what happens with that in the next coming years.
You mentioned earlier kind of forced embrace of change in larger companies. In reality, companies are not just big or small. They're kind of high velocity or a little bit more slower moving. I think it's more about the speed or the velocity of organizations. I remember Erwin Jacobs always referring to Qualcomm as just a startup with really good cash flow. And so is that the goal, to be a startup with really good cash flow? Is it about the cash flow? The VC community is all about capital gains. And in your role at PwC, you were much more than just a VC. So how do you, when you think about building a business, capital gains and cash flow, mutually exclusive, How do you slice that one?
I see the benefit of startups versus large behemoth companies in speed to market shift, being able to pivot. And a lot of people think pivot's a bad word. I think pivot's a great word.
Yep.
If you're nimble enough and can pivot to a market shift quickly, that's a huge advantage.
Yep.
And my analogy is, some of the large companies are aircraft carriers shifting slowly into the wind, where a small startup is like a little speedboat that can get there much faster.
Yep.
And to me, when you're in a dynamic environment that's shifting aggressively, like the wireless ecosystem that we're talking about, that's moving to digital, that's incredibly important. So it's not so much about cash flow or cap gains as it is the ability to shift quickly in the environment, strategically.
Having been in Europe for 33 years, I equate it to like the difference between being the eldest child and and I think Europeans in general, gross generalization, are more concerned about maintaining the estate than disrupting it. I'm not sure the disruption is the word either. I like the words that you're using. We say velocity of shift, but it is that speed of shift.
Yeah, and to me, the word is innovation. I believe innovators will prevail in the new digital economy. And continuing to innovate, react to market demands, react to new technologies and market opportunities quickly are the firms and the enterprises and markets that will succeed, I think.
Yes, indeed.
So disruption is important. Innovation is even more important.
And do you think that the multiplier for the innovator compared to the incumbent, do you think it's like a 3x? Is it a 10x? Do you have to be how much better in terms of growth of market, decrease in cost, growth of revenue? When you think about what DGS offers to the market and so forth, is it a 10x on what's there, or is it just or is it I need to be innovating on all categories? Or
that's an interesting question, and I'll use an M&A perspective or analogy. So historically, when you buy and sell companies, you may be looking at a multiple of revenue or EBITDA trailing 12 months to value the company. When you're a technology play, it's really, what are the prospective revenues that this technology can bring to my company? And you're moving way beyond 5x, 10x in multiples to more like 20 and 30x. So to me, a technology play and the market share that a company could grab with the right technology is so much more impactful for the investors than a traditional multiple of earnings or revenue that people use to value companies.
Strategic at a different level.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
You really and your master class for the entrepreneurs, that some of whom are on their first rounds of funding and so forth, was very well received. So thank you for doing a double hitter, so to speak. Would you come back if we invite you to come back to another FT? Will you come back and join us again?
Absolutely, yes.
I very much appreciate your presence. Thank you for coming over, Fernando.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. That brings us to the end of our discussion with Fernando Murias, the CEO of Digital Global Systems here at the FT Winter 2024 in Lake Zurich DF7Z.